Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 183. A guten Yontef and a freilichen Yontef. We're now in the middle of Zman Simchasenu, and we are, as the Rebbe explains, based on the principle of Mailim B'Kedesh, which means that in everything that's holy, we continue to ascend from level to level. That itself is a tremendous principle in life, that we never remain static, we never remain stationary. We're always climbing, we're always growing. So in the joy of Sukkot, which is many levels of joy, being Moedim L'Simcha in general, every holiday is connected to joy. And Zman Simchasenu, in that itself, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot is called Zman Simchasenu, the time of our rejoicing. In that itself, we have the Simchas Beis HaShoaivah, during the time of the Beis HaMikdash, when they would draw the water, so Vaishaftim B'mayim B'sasan, they would draw the water B'sasan with joy. And of course it escalates into Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, which of course is the apex and the ultimate joy. Joy is a tremendous resource that we were blessed with. God forbid, sometimes to appreciate something you have to look at, if we didn't have, imagine we had no joy in our lives, how difficult life would be. So we're blessed with the capacity in the soul that we have the fact of the ability to be able to be joyous, simcha. As Chassidus explains, simcha is not like tainug. Tainug is pleasure. Pleasure is more internal, more intimate. Joy is something that is more exuberant, more expressive, more what you do with others. And joy is a tremendous asset in helping us deal, number one, with the challenges of life. Because when you have joy, you have that type of upbeat attitude and the spirit necessary. As the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, the negative power of atzvus, which is depression, the opposite of joy. Sadness, but he speaks there about atzvus in a negative way, not like merira's sadness, which leads to motivating you to do something greater, but rather atzvus, the negative, is that it just demoralizes you. And when you're demoralized, you don't have the capacity to fight, and you don't have the capacity to grow. You have no capacity to even overcome that which is demoralizing you. So joy is a tremendous asset, and once a year, in the most fullest sense of the word, as I said, all holidays, and even Shabbos, even though it's einig, pleasure, we also say B'yem Simchaschem El HaShabbos. Shabbos has also an element of joy. And of course, Ivdus Hashem B'Simcha, a person is supposed to serve God with joy all the time. And indeed, in the Rambam, in Hilchos Lulav, when he talks about the laws of Simcha, of Sukkot, he begins with that Simcha is something that we have to always be doing. But there's one holiday, as Chassidus says, in the month of Tishrei. Tishrei is from the word Reishis, the head of the year, like the head, that's like the central nervous system that controls the entire body. This month controls the entire movements and the entire trajectory of the coming year. And as such, Rosh Hashanah is a Moed Klali that gives us Kabbalah Seil, the idea of accepting something greater than we are. There is Rosh Yom Kippur that gives us sanctity, Kedusha for the entire year. And then we have Sukkot, which brings joy for the entire year. So essentially, we're given the resource from the engine room, from the source code, if you wish, is downloaded within us in a completely new way, because Rosh Hashanah, everything begins anew with a new and unprecedented energy. And this joy is something that we celebrate right now as we grow, as I said, every day of Sukkot. And this is not just for now, it's meant to serve for the entire year, to have a joyous life, a beautiful life, with blessings that should cause us to have joy, that we should see it revealed, and we should not take for granted those gifts and blessings and always appreciate them with the simcha that is necessary. And yes, it's a command. You can be commanded to have joy. You could ask the question, how could one be commanded to have joy? Same question that the Maggid asks in Mazutcha Maggid on Ava, how could you command someone to have love? Loving God or loving a fellow. Love, you can't regulate emotions, but you can do things, Devarim HaMevim Lidei Ahava. You can do things, you can contemplate and do things that bring you to love. You can do things and contemplate that bring you to simcha. When you think of the blessings in your life, you think of your health, you think of the gifts. So even if we do have some things that may be challenging, we also have other sides that bring us to a deeper level of joy, which in general, as we know, when you're joyous, your spirit is lighter, your whole being is one that you're able to just deal with things in a far more powerful way than when a person is down. So that's a general introduction to where we are now. And again, good Yontif and a Freilichen Yontif to everyone. So we're going to cover, because this is the Cholamoid, second day Cholamoid, because of Shabbos, which was yesterday. We're going to cover the events that go on this coming week, which is, of course, leads us into the end of the week of Shmini Atzeres and Shani Rabbah, Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. Wednesday is a Shani Rabbah. Thursday, Friday is Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, which again leads us into another Shabbos in this year's special schedule where Yom Tov goes straight into Shabbos. And as the Rebbe explains, the chazakah of having the intensity, not just of a Yom Tov and then you go into a Chol, even if it's Chol HaMoed, but it's still relatively relatively to Shabbos is a day you can't technically work, and Shabbos takes the spirit of and energy of Yom Tov and right into Shabbos, and that gives us an even deeper injection in the power that we have for the coming year. And remember, in the context of applying everything, Torah Meloshen Hira, everything in Torah is Hira. So the fact that it's 3 days is not just a technicality. It has an application and a lesson in life. Torah means Lashon Hara, which, as I mentioned many times, is the most common expression in the Rebbe's talks, because the importance of understanding the relevance and personal application of Torah, and hence the name Chassidus applied, applying this idea that this is meant to empower us with to fulfill the mission for which we were charged as we entered the year after Shabbos Bereshis. So we have this power that goes from Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, straight into Shabbos Bereshis, and with that, we're launched into the world v'Yakov Hol Chadarke. So let's take things in order. I wanted to just complement this by adding that last week's episode I should have mentioned, but I will do it now, was that the day before Erev Sukkot is Yud Gimmel Tishrei, the Yortzeit Stalkus of the Rebbe Marash. And as such, the Rebbe Marash, or the Chatchila Rebbe, as the Rebbe would call him, everything he took was an approach of the Chatchila Rebbe, which of course fits right into the concept of Simcha. So I just wanted to talk about the 135th anniversary of the Stalkus of the Rebbe Marash, Yud Gimmel Tishrei, even though it was right before Sukkot. And as I said, it belongs last week's episode, but I felt amiss not mentioning it among all the different things that were going on that we did discuss. The Rebbe Marash, I just want to talk about one or two short episodes of his passing, was unique in the fact that we have stories of the details of how he knew and anticipated what was coming. And of course was a Rebbe that lived, the Fiyarach all the other Rabbeim, he was born Tofuf Tzadik Gimmel, and he passed away in Tofresh Mem Gimmel. So it would be close to 50 years. Born Beizir, Teferes Shebet Teferes. And the Rebbe Marash, every Rebbe is obviously a moyer and has a commonality, but there's also the uniqueness of each Rebbe, and the things the Rebbe would always emphasize with the Rebbe Marash was his L'chatchila Rebbe approach, that instead of dealing with a challenge in a sense where, if you can't go under, you go over, as the Welt says. And the Rebbe Marash said, which simply means that you're dealing with any type of obstacle or any type of resistance or anything that's blocking. So the world says that the way to go about it is to try to tackle it regularly. If not, you go over it. You try to go through the door, so to speak, or you try to go through the regular channels. And if not, you go over. And he says, I say l'chatchila Rebbe, which means, as the Rebbe interpreted it, to be something that we go l'chatchila. You don't start small and then say, we'll do something bigger if we have no choice, so to speak. L'chatchila, you go in a much greater thinking big, so to speak. Obviously, Eirus the Teyu and Kalim the Tikkun, as the Rebbe always emphasized, not wild and crazy, but has to be ultimately in some type of structure and some type of way that can be contained and experienced. So the Rebbe Marash's lesson to us is a very straightforward one, that an approach to life is to always take the high road and always go above and not wait till that should be the last resort, it should be the first resort. And the Rebbe Marash's life itself, as we know the many stories, he lived that way. He lived in a certain type of expansiveness, which everyone understood was not a gashmizdika thing, a physical thing, but it was his Seder Aveda. That was his way of being. When he was, as we know, also quite sickly throughout his lifetime, which he concealed most of the time. But when it came Rosh Hashanah, that last year, Tofresh Mem Gimmel, the Rebbe Marash didn't blow shofar as usual, so the family sensed that something was going on, and the Chassidim sensed, And that's when the Rebbe Marash revealed the fact that he was suffering from something for a while, and then it became more exposed with the different doctors that came to see him. So there were different specialists. They finally brought one big specialist, a non-Jewish doctor, and after he examined the Rebbe Marash, he came out, and all the doctors were waiting to hear what he has to say, and the family and others. He said, if you think you know your Rebbe, I'll tell you who your Rebbe really is. And the Rebbe Marash went ahead and spoke about, the doctor began to explain how the Rebbe Marash, when he examined him, he asked him to different examination. He also examined his palm. He asked him if he could check his palm. And then after he examined his palm, he asked him if he asked permission if he could make a small incision under his ear, which would be a form of surgery, because he was checking. And the Rebbe Marash, suddenly his face became very concerned, and the doctor said to the Rebbe Marash, don't be concerned. He thought he was afraid because of the pain or the danger involved. He said, no, the Rebbe Marash said it's not that. And the Rebbe Marash started explaining to him exactly what he was doing, that he had an infection in the blood that Rebbe Marash had for many years in his life, and the doctor was checking where it spread. So the palm to see if it spread there, and then he wanted to know if it spread to the head. God forbid. And that's why he wanted to make the incision. And the Rebbe Marash said to him, yes, it did spread to the head, and the Rebbe Marash knew that already, but make the incision anyway because to confirm it and so on. As such, the Rebbe Marash began to explain to him at length his whole condition. The doctor, who was considered one of the biggest professors, if not the biggest, was so amazed. He said he told the people sitting there, he felt like he was sitting like a student in front of the greatest professor of his own teachers. He says, and all the while that the Rebbe Marash was saying this, he was in tremendous pain because he knew what kind of infection it was. And that pain, and nevertheless, he was able to contain it and speak that way. He says, that's who your Rebbe is. There are many other stories in detail. We don't have the time to go through it. It's a whole farbrengen of its own that deserves the Rebbe Marash, how he told the Rebbetzin in a very shocking way, but also in a very prescient way, that I'm going up 32 levels, you're going to go down 32 levels. She lived 32 more years. Rebbetzin Rivka, the name Beis Rivka is after her, the Rebbe Marash's Rebbetzin. And how the day of Yud Gimmel Tishrei, he moved his clock, he took the clock and moved it to 11:51, I believe, a.m., and put in a paper, that the clock should stop right there. And that's exactly when the Histalkus happened. Before that, he called in all his children and gave them their brachas. The Razor, Rab Zalman was the oldest boy, and then the oldest, then came the Rebbe Rashab, and the youngest was 4 years old, the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushke. And he said to her that me and your mother always wanted to walk into the chuppah. She was 4 years old. But the Eibishter has a rotzen, his was a different rotzen. You could see a certain, not only Rebbishkeit, but the humanity of that, and the power of that, tremendous, unbelievable. And then that day, Yud Gimel Tishrei, the Rebbe Marash was nostalgic. Now, because it was right before Sukkot, the news didn't get around so quickly. There wasn't all the technology we have today. But finally, it did get around, and certain different cities, they found out about it later in Sukkot. In Chernigov, where the Rav was, famous Chassid and Rav Radatz, which is the Radatz Chain, that when the news came there, it was Shmini Atzeres by night. They were going to Hakofot, and someone went over to the Radatz and told him the Rebbe is avek. When he heard that, the Rebbe is avek, which means the Rebbe went away, which was an expression that used in such situations, he fainted, and they could not revive him. Shumei for not. Doctors came, and it was dangerous. So they finally went to his father, who was already an older man who was at home, Rab Peretz Chaim. I believe they say about the Rab Peretz that he was the only one that saw 6 Rabbeim. He saw the Frierdiker Rebbe in a Vigala when he was just born. And he also saw the Alter Rebbe as a little child. So Rab Peretz went to the shul, they took him, and he went over and said to his son, whispered to his son, the Radatz, a Rebbe geht kemel nicht avek. A Rebbe never goes away. And the Radatz was revived by that. I think the lesson is a tremendous lesson, especially for today. We talk about Gimmel Tammuz. A Rebbe geht kemel nicht avek. We don't need more interpretation than that. So this is a little taste of the Rebbe Marash. Of course, there's a lot more to talk about. As Ma'amorim is Chassidus, But I wanted to add that because I felt, as I said, that I missed that and not discussed it at all, frankly, last week. Okay. Let us go now to we're going to go in order. So we're going to talk about what is the significance of Simchas Beis HaShoaivah today. And then we'll move to the other days of the week. To the best of my ability, being that we have the limited time that we always have, but to try to pack it in, mu'at machzik hameruba, which means put a lot into a little time, as much as possible. Now, Simchas Beis HaShoaivah, as you know, is a Mishnah and the Gemaras and Sukkah that talks about the Simchas Beis HaShoaivah, v'shaftem mayim b'sasan, as I mentioned before, the direct commandment that all year round they would bring, we called wine libations, when they would bring Nisuch hayayin on the Mizbeach. But on Sukkot there was a special mitzvah to also bring water. And the water was drawn from the Me'ah Shiluach, which was a spring of water not far in Yerushalayim, and they would draw it from there and carry it to the Beis HaMikdash. And then in the morning, when the Mizbeach was being prepared, that's when they would pour the water. So there was shaftim mayim b'sasim, not just the pouring of the water, but the drawing of the water was accompanied with a whole bunch of celebration. Mish leira simcha b'simchas beis HaShoaivah leira simcha b'yom of the Gemara says. Someone who did not see the joy of the drawing of the water never saw simcha in their entire lives. B'yomov, which is a very powerful statement because there's a lot of simcha. We talked about Zman Simcha Sena of Sukkos. We have simcha in many different areas of life, and yet this evoked a tremendous amount of simcha. Chassidus explains it at length. The Alter Rebbe L'Kutei Torah and the Rebbeim afterwards, and the Rebbe, of course, how mayim, even though yayin naturally evokes joy because yayin is yayin leva misameach es elikim v'asanoshim. It's a natural properties, and to create joy, because its physical property affects a person that way. Water, when you drink water, does not cause joy, and yet the Kabbalah Seil, the Simcha, is just the pure connection that God commanded us to do this mitzvah. Now, of course, this is all connected to the Beis HaMikdash. Today we don't draw the water, we don't have the altar physically, we don't have the physical temple. Yet, everything that existed then, but physically exists always spiritually. And the Rebbe, as in many other areas of Jewish tradition and Jewish customs and Jewish life, revived, or you can even say was the first to really focus on us celebrating it, at least as a zecher, to remember that everything that happens then also happens now. And today we do it with just pure joy. Similar thing you find about Chamisha Sabav, similar you find about Zayin Cheshvan, many things that were significant dates during the time of the temple, the Beis HaMikdash. The Rebbe turned it into something that we can live with and make relevant in our lives. Now this means, because Ruchnis, it's always there. Physically, just like we have Tfilas Keneged Midin Tiknum. Prayer corresponds to, and Shalma Parim Svasenu. Instead of the offerings we brought in the Beis HaMikdash today, we do it through prayer, through davening. And the same thing, other things that we do, Zecher L'Mikdash, that we do, L'Mikdash Hakil is another example that the Rebbe also revived, even though it exists in Sfarim, but making it a real palatable and tangible custom that we should fulfill during that year of Hakel. So Simchas Beis HaShoaivah, and you see it all the way from the early. You see it even before the Rebbe's Nesias. He brings Simchas Beis HaShoaivah in the Rishimas. You find long Rishimas how he spoke to the Bnei Yeshiva, the connection to the Talmidei Yeshiva, and this continued, of course, when the Rebbe became Rebbe. And as well as throughout all the years, and then it only accelerated. Simchas Beis HaShoaivah. The different discussions, the different beauty, and so on. And the Rebbe main thing was the focus of the extra joy that it should lead us to. Now, Tov Shemem Aleph, which was a Shnas Hakel, that year, 1980 it would be, because it's still the older year. Tov Shemem Aleph, the Rebbe then began, the first time that he spoke, he started speaking every night Sukkos. And he spoke about taking the simcha outside of the shul and going into the streets, which is the root of the custom why the Simchas Beis HaShoaivah now in Crown Heights and so many other communities. In the streets, the simcha should be barabim, begoli, and spoke at length what the reason for that is. And I also addressed the fact that kalkolosan zui takanosan. In the Beis HaMikdash, it was only the second night, because they used the challah, they used the flute, and they used other things that were not used during Yom Tov. Since it's one day Yontif, so the Simcha started the second night. But today, because we don't have Gashmizdik, we don't use these physical instruments, we can start the joy the first night. And the elaboration, again, I'm not going to go through all the talks, but it's important to emphasize that Simchas Beis HaShoaivah became a very tangible reality, and indeed has brought thousands and thousands of Jews together. We see the joy, how joy unites people. When they dance and sing together. When you speak, two people can't speak on top of each other. You sing together, you dance together. It's a unifying force, the Achdus, which of course is a central theme of Sukkot, the Achdus of the four minim, of the four different types of Jews. So Simchas Beis HaShoaivah captures that in this joyous celebration, and that continues to grow night after night. So it's something that both for men, women, and children, obviously in the right way, tznius is separate apart, but you see that what kind of effect it has on people when they dance and celebrate together. So the significance of Simchas Beis HaShoaivah today is that the ruchnius of it remains, and in many ways even more increases, even though we don't have the physical elements and we don't have the actual drawing of the water and we don't have the altar, but we have it all on a spiritual dimension. And above all, the most important thing is that we have it in our hearts and souls as we dance and sing physically. As we see, you could be very happy inside, but when you actually express it in a song and dance, it's got on a completely different level. And in a practical and a Chassidus applied element, as I mentioned before with Mayim, it's a celebration of the mere fact that we are here on earth, the mere fact that we're connected, and it doesn't have to have a particular tziyur, a particular shape or form or even taste like wine does. Water is plain, but it's still the gift of God, and water is necessary for our sustenance. And then once a year we focus on the shafta mayim b'sasan, to draw the water with the sasan, with joy, meaning that even the regular things, even the things that don't always have the fireworks and don't have all the accrements and all the elements that you could say wine, the rich wine has, that also becomes a source, and indeed even a greater source of joy in our lives. Okay. We'll move over, being that Simchas Beis HaShoaivah continues, and we're talking about today, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Tuesday night will be Hishayin Rabbah. Wednesday night will be Yontif Shmini Atzeres. So basically, Wednesday is Hishayin Rabbah, and Wednesday night Shmini Atzeres, and then comes, of course, Simchas Torah. I'm going to focus on Simchas Torah primarily, not because of lack of the other things, but simply because of time, and rely that you'll look up some of the things in your own, and hopefully when you learn Chassidus, you find the relevance of each of these elements. If you like a little assistance, you can look up in the book that I've composed called 60 Days, a Spiritual Guide to the High Holidays. There is the discussion there at length about Hishayin Rabbah and Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, all in the beautiful process, because it's all part of a mosaic, as I mentioned last week, and I'll mention here again. Shmeili Tachas Lareshi is, and then it says V'yamini Techapkeni, that your left arm, Tachas says, but behind my head, which is left, is Gevura Yirid Yom Nerayim of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the first half of the month, and when the Sukkos begin, Tezvav, the full moon, the second half of the month, and that's Yamini, the Chesed, the full moon. The Chesed, the Yamini Techavkeni, your right arm embraces me. But then the pasuk continues, and as the Zohar explains, it relates to Hishayin Rabbah, Shmini Atzeres, and Simchas Torah. Think of it this way: it's all an accelerating and accumulative process of the love and connection between ourselves and God, between the neshama and its source, that begins first in an element of awe and respect, and then breaks out in song and dance in a revealed way. Because when you're standing in front of the king, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, it's Vigila Berada. You have pleasure and you have joy and celebration, but Berada. It's encompassed, or you could say embedded, Berada, in trembling, in the awe. Once you leave the king's presence, so to speak of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, that which was Bekesa, was concealed in B'chei Shefer, in the Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of Rosh Hashanah, when the moon was just a new moon, it gets revealed. Because that's when the full moon, so everything comes out in a revealed way. So the joy of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is actually the celebration of Sukkot, is the joy that we had then, but now we express it in that full sense of the word, the dancing and the singing of Sukkot and the days that come as it grows in the days of Sukkot itself. What it means in Aveda is that now you're not just having the experience with Yira, the respect and the boundaries of understanding God as King, Melech HaMishpat, and you speak about that, the Melech HaElam, as the King, as the one that was beyond us, but now comes a relationship where it's a relationship of love, of embrace, which is what a sukkah is about. It embraces us. And the Lakachtam Lachem is the Dal Minim, take that embrace, that Makivdik embrace, and bring it into a primis internally within us. And joy is the celebration of when a couple who got married, Yom Chasanos is at Matan Torah, Yom Kippur, the second tablets was considered the Chasana, because that's when it became permanent, not like the first tablets that were broken due to the sin and the betrayal of the golden calf. But now the Chasana, when do you dance? Sheva Brachas, 7 days of Sukkot, B'Shivas Yimei Sukkot, the 8 days for us because of Shmini Atzeres, but essentially 7 days is Zayimei Mishta that comes right after the Chasana. I know there's a hefsek of 4 days, and it's been discussed in different places, but it's not for here. But the point being is that this is a celebration, with the culmination of Simchas Torah not being Shavuos. As Chassidus explains, the Simchas Torah is the celebration after Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur is the second luchas and all the qualities that now you know it's a permanent thing because it's something that remained with us. It was not, God forbid, broken. So we have here the days of Sukkot as being a process of this connection and this embrace. So it's just like my left hand under your head, your left hand under my head, and your right arm that embraces me, that embrace gets deeper to the point where we say that on Shmini Atzeres is the klitas hazer, is the actual consummation of the relationship. Ano umalka b'chedehi. 7 days, as the different Mashalim Rashi gives, and the Medrash from the Medrash, 7 days of the week we bring even Purim, we bring offerings for all the nations of the world. But then comes one day where Hashem says, before we part, let's make one Suda. That'll just be you and I. Ano Malka. I and the King alone. That's why it's 1 day. Shmini Atzeres, Par Echad, Ayel Echad, everything is one. The oneness, because now it's coming to the intimacy, the full intimacy between God and the people. And that's expressed deepest in the celebration of Simchas Torah, which our custom is to begin the celebration the night of Shmini Atzeres and only accelerate and grow the second night, Simchas Torah, and of course the day of Simchas Torah. So in the process, you're dealing with a deeper relationship with your own soul, with your divine component, with the divine, with God. And that means, in the context of Chassidus applied, it means that our relationship is not about the world around us, not about our interaction. That's the kavanah is to go make a dira b'tachtenim. The purpose is to go and transform the world and make it a home for God. But the process of how we get there is that we have this relationship, and first there's that connection. And then with that empowerment, we can go out and actually transform the world. But we're not defined. Our identity is not defined by our activities. Who you are and what you do is not the same thing. What you do is your job in this world. Unfortunately, many people define themselves by what they do. You ask them who they are, they give you their business card. Who you are is expressed in Sukkot, the true you, of obviously following Yom Kippur, following Rosh Hashanah. And Sukkot is the celebration of the true you. And that celebration is one that you are a divine agent, and that you are no malka b'chadei, you stand alone with God, and this is the power you have, which overrides and is more powerful than anything in the world. So no matter what happens in life, you always have this. It's a foundation that's unshakable, an unwavering foundation of life. And Shmini Atzeres, we celebrate it in the fullest sense of the word. And Simchas Torah, and at Yisrael, Simchas Torah is the same day as Shmini Atzeres. By us, it's 2 days outside of Israel. So Simchas Torah is even a greater expression of it all, and as it is with all the Yom Tov Sheni Shel Goliath, but especially in this case, Simchas Torah is that day. The Mitler Rebbe actually said that the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, the people living in Israel, can mix kasha with bochaven, which means 2 different type of ma'acholim that shouldn't be mixed. I shouldn't say shouldn't be mixed. They are in Eretz Yisrael, but in a way, the Simchas Torah is somewhat overshadowed or becomes all encompassed in the Shmini Atzeres day, whereas outside of Eretz Yisrael, you actually have them both in full glory. And there's a difference between Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah, which again is not the time and space here to get into. But suffice it to say that each one is the level of growth. Shmini Atzeres is Atzeres. The word klita, one of the meaning of Atzeres means to klita, a pause. It also means a absorbing. the absorbing of all the Giluyim of Elul and Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the 4 days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot is absorbed in that type of intimate fashion, as I mentioned, where it becomes the conception begins. And you actually say the seed settles in, gets absorbed in the womb. The birth will be, according to Kabbalah, Chassidus explains it, Shvi Shel Pesach, 7 months from now, which is 7 months from now. But the conception has taken place. And we celebrate that connection. And as I said, that connection empowers us to achieve everything we need to achieve with our lives. So that's a general overview to Simchas Torah. We'll talk a bit later about Hakofot, why we do Hakofot, but just briefly let me say the following, and that will complement what I'm saying here, is that in this relationship, like any good relationship, there's a combination of many factors. One is a makif and one is a pnimi. So everything has to have something that surrounds. That's why people, let's say, hug each other. But they also have to have a personal connection. They have to have a personal one flesh. And they have to have that type of union that completely joins them together. But at the same time, they're two separate entities. So this is the constant balance that Kabbalah and Chassidus talk about, the interface between the divine and existence. That on one hand, you need to have something that's more so-called on the divine level, so it's makif, it's still above us, which is one of the reasons we go around, and we'll talk about this a little later more in detail. And then, but there's the pnimius. So the sukkah is a makif, the pnimius would be l'kachtam lachem, the daled minim. Mitzvahs is generally a makif, you don't eat a mitzvah, but then Torah is seiroscha b'seichma, you understand that you become one, yichud nifla, as he says in Tanya, Perik Hey. So you talk about this Perik Dal and Hey, where he talks about Torah. So this is a type of union. So you need to have both elements, the makif and pnimi, which is so much part of this whole process, and it's also the process of any good relationship. There's an element that hovers, like the chuppah, that hovers over a couple, and it's a makif that equalizes them, but then there's the uniqueness of each one of them and their connection on that level. Simchas Torah, when we dance Simchas Torah, what we're doing is, as Chassidus explains, we don't sit and learn in the Sefer Torah. It's wrapped up. So on one hand, you could say it's missing the main thing. Torah is about learning the Torah, or at least reading in the Torah, which we do on the day of Simchas Torah. Here we dance with wrapped up Sefer Torah. Why? Because it's such a makif that it surrounds everybody, because everyone dances equally. We talk about learning. Two people sit down. Person who knows more is going to understand the Torah more, and knows less is going to understand less. That's pnimi. The pnimi is the kapara Torah, but Simchas Torah is a celebration of the etzem of Torah, and the etzem of Torah, everybody's equal. Everybody dances equally, and you see that, and you see that type of dimension that revealed on Simchas Torah. Because you're dealing now with a connection, as I said, the core connection between God and us, ourselves. The core connection between you and who you really are and what you do, so to speak. And that connection is what really is an equalizer. Obviously, that equalization we want to then should permeate and affect and be integrated in our individuality. But Simchas Torah has that element of that joy, as I said before, the unity of joy that brings us all together. When you celebrate, you see that equality between parents and children, different ages, different levels of academic excellence, and you have all these come together like l'sheichem shivteichem aten mitzavim hayem. We all stand together, from the highest, the greatest leaders, to the people who carry the water and chop the wood, because you're dealing with the etzem, and in etzem there's no chilukim, there's no distinction between levels. But again, this doesn't mean there shouldn't be distinction. It means that you want to reach a place like that and then take that and draw it into the distinctions and the uniqueness of each one of us. Now, Simchas Torah has many other lessons as well. I mentioned before the second luchas, that's the celebration of that element. But we'll stop with that, just to give something to all of us to be able to personalize it. And obviously, the real mission here is that each of us should take the ideas and personalize it, that when we dance Simchas Torah, it shouldn't just be a mechanical thing, or you just do it by custom, but it should actually be something personal, something that speaks to you, and each of us can take this atzmis dikr celebration and internalize it in the deepest possible way, knowing that the core you, the divine image in which you were created, is one with God, and there's a day when we celebrate that indestructible union Simchas Torah. I just want to add that in episode 38, cross-referencing, in episode 38, which would go back a while, I spoke about more details. Dealing then is this dancing of Simchas Torah a form of escape, again about its personal relevance, the role of children Simchas Torah. So I rely that you'll look up there if you're interested in more information. Here's a good opportunity to mention that all these episodes, we're now already in episode 183, are archived and available online, meaningfullife.com/MyLife, where you can also submit an anonymous question or questions, make comments, and you have all the resources, MyLife resources, which are quite extensive at this point. As I said, 182 episodes to date, and with as well as I said, all the archives, as well as the opportunity to ask questions, as well as all the essays written in the essay contest, the 3 essay contests we've already held in connection with MyLife, people's personal application of Chassidus in different ways, and we have always review them, which I will do at the end of this episode, as is our custom. Now with that, I want to go over to a question. A few people asked this question, not the first time, and let's address that, and that is Simchas Torah question. Help. Simchas Torah for women. Is Simchas Torah only for men? Is it a holiday only for man? Rabbi Jacobson, one person writes, please give me and other women some advice on what Simchas Torah means for us. The Rebbe taught us how all Jews can rejoice equally on Simchas Torah, the learned as well as the ignorant. All can dance together with the Torah equally. This is a very nice picture of unity and the fundamental equality of all Jews. But this really isn't about all Jews, just about men. What can a woman do to rejoice with the Torah? Personally, watching men dance doesn't do it for me, and I feel left out. Thanks very much for any guidance you could provide. Another person writes, hello. Thank you very much for your wonderful classes that keep me inspired. Every year I'm struggling to find my role as a woman on Simchas Torah. The community we live in is small. It seems to be a very exciting holiday for men, but there's not much women can do besides watching how men dance. Rejoice and have fun. I could accept it as reasons for me are very clear, since only men are obligated to read from the Torah. But this year, my 6-year-old daughter asked me why she can't participate in dancing, and I tried my best to tell her that girls have their own special role that boys don't have, and opposite. But I realized that she was still very disappointed and not very impressed with my answer. Can you please offer an explanation for lack of female involvement on Simchas Torah that is going to be inspiring to women, and maybe offer suggestions for female activities we could do on Simchas Torah in order not to feel too much left out? Okay, very direct question, and I tried to answer in the most direct possible way. Firstly, let's make this very clear. The Torah is for all people. The Torah was given to men and women equally, and as a matter of fact, Moshe was told to speak first to the women for different reasons, and most importantly because they have a certain foundational connection, and to make sure to preserve that it would be fulfilled. As it says in Svarim, the Rebbe brings in a number of sichas, that women are more Yerushalayim in many ways, more amunah, and therefore are more prone to keeping the mitzvahs even more than men. Mitzvahs means, of course, Torah. Now, as far as the fact that women have some parts of Torah that are not for them to learn because it's Nizman Groma and mitzvahs that are not connected to them, so be it. That still does not mean they don't have a connection, a fundamental connection to Torah, which is God's blueprint. So let's make that very clear. So therefore, Simchas Torah is for all people, men, women, and children. At the same time, we all know the clear distinctions, not just for tznius purposes in the technical sense of the word tznius, men and women apart, but also spiritually. Men and women, like in the Beis HaMikdash, have two different roles in how they fulfill God's will in this world. So, let me put it bluntly. For women to sit around and just watch men dance, you could do it if that's what works, but that doesn't necessarily mean the only way to celebrate Simchas Torah. It is true that in 770, and that especially when the Rebbe danced Simchas Torah, people wanted to see the Rebbe being the leader, and the Rebbe dancing Simchas Torah. So both men and women, even though men were downstairs technically with the Rebbe, male, but the Rebbe was running, so to speak, and people were part of the Rebbe celebration, also celebrating themselves. You could say everybody danced with the Rebbe. fact that we don't have physically the Rebbe now, you could argue that, one second, so what are we dancing with? You could say the spiritual presence of the Rebbe. So this is already a personal decision where a person feels the best place that they can celebrate. And we're talking here not just mechanically or culturally or by rote or because others are doing it. The key thing is, like in anything in life, I've been Simchas Torah in 770 all my life. Later years I've been to California where my daughter is. But nevertheless, I've been Simchas Torah in shuls. As a male, I've been with the males. And I can tell you, many men dance and celebrate, it's true, but they don't even know why they're dancing and celebrating, which is fine. Many times that's also fine. As I said before, Simchas Torah is not about understanding. But nevertheless, how much more appreciated would it be if you really know what you're dancing about and what Torah is and why Simchas Torah is so important. So even though the dancing is not a time to sit down and learn, but we're supposed to learn Shleishim Yom Kedem Achag. The more you know something, the more you can appreciate what it is. I always use this example. It's a very simple example. Lahavdil. You go to a big meeting, a business meeting, which can be a very serious business deal, or getting a job. You don't just walk in there unprepared. You prepare, you research, you're well versed in what you're going to be talking because you want to make an impression and you want to show that you're experienced. And in general, anything that is value, there's boy hachanech, the Gemara says. Anything valuable you prepare for. You prepare a good meal. You prepare a gift. You pack things. You do things in ways that prepare. If you really want to appreciate the power of a Yom Tov, that's why that Moshe Rabbeinu was Masakin. He decreed that Shleishim Yom, 30 days before the holiday, you have to learn the laws. It's not just technically to know what you're supposed to do, Pesach or Sukkot, or not to do. That's on one level. But it's also to appreciate the Yom Tov itself. And Chassidus gives us that appreciation. So I would say the following. Simchas Torah is for everybody. Men and women cannot dance together, obviously, and cannot dance in the same location for all the reasons that we know and understand. Especially in time of Simcha, we know Bezdin sent around shluchim, messengers, to make sure that when people are Simcha and lighthearted, you have to be stronger in the boundaries. And not because the boundaries are something negative, it's because intimacy, which is the power of a very divine power, needs to be, in the world that we live in, needs to be monitored, needs to be tempered, needs to be controlled. I don't mean controlled in a negative way, it needs to be channeled. Or else you can have danger, a lot of danger. The greater the power of something, Simcha's great power, the greater the challenges and the greater the greater the difficulties the greater the person, the greater the challenges they have. So it's because of the greatness. That's why, for example, the Holy of Holies, you don't just go into the Kodesh Kodashim any time. Why? Because it's a holy place, not because it's inappropriate. So Simchas Torah is even more care has to be taken. The fact that we live in a male-dominated hierarchy, and women often feel that way, and for good reason, does not take away from the emes of it. That actually happens to be a flaw. So we have to find creative ways for women to be able to celebrate Simchas Torah and not feel that they're bound by the male celebration. And that's what we need to do. The fact that it hasn't been done or hasn't been done enough, that's why we're here. Now I need to add something, an interesting episode. It's one of the only times that the Rebbe actually writes that he changed his mind. When Rav Shlomo Riskin was a Yechidus, he talked to the Rebbe about women dancing with the Sefer Torah separately, obviously. Give them the Sefer Torah to dance with. Is it something appropriate? And he says that the Rebbe answered, not only is it appropriate, it's something that's a must, especially in our time. Okay. After that Yechidus, the Rebbe wrote him a letter saying that though he said that, he gave it a second thought, he's changing his mind because looking in the halacha, not that the Rebbe didn't know the halacha before, but the Rebbe felt that it's not appropriate to go ahead and make a pirza that can lead to all kinds of things that may be not healthy. Meaning other so-called leniency with different halachas. Anyone interested in the letter is available, an English letter. Now it's interesting that the Rebbe's Havamina was to say yes, and then later he said no. Now I don't believe that the Rebbe's Havamina was because the Rebbe missed anything, obviously. It's because there is a Yesod. Now obviously we have to follow the conclusion of the Rebbe, but it means that there is room and we have to find creative ways to make sure that women have the Simchas Torah celebration. And I'm not talking bending over backwards that women have to be like men and just satisfy them. In a Chanam, as one of you writes in this letter, is that a woman celebrates in a different way. But you have to, the pride For a woman to grow up, a girl to grow up and have to ask a question, why can't I be part of this, is a tragedy. Because that will lead the person to think, you know what, Judaism is male-centered, and it's not. As we all know, the shul was never the center of the universe for a Jew. It was always the home, that keres habayis. Now, I'm not saying Simchas Torah, everyone has to stay home, but there's a Simchas Torah that has to be found in a Chassidic way. I think if Chassidic minds come together, especially Chassidic women come together, and do it in a way that's consistent with halacha and consistent with the Rebbe's directive, we could achieve great things. Do I have a particular suggestion? I can come up with ideas, but I wanted to address at the root. So here's one of the challenges we have today. We live in a different time, but we also want to maintain the integrity of what Simchas Torah is from a Torah and Chassidic point of view. And as I said, the Rebbe's answer to Rabbi Riskin. And at the same time, find ways to absolutely celebrate it. And I am guarantee that if we apply ourselves, we will find such ways. As far as this Simchas Torah goes, I think any woman or any girl listening to this, and for that matter, men too, should care about their own families, their wives and their children, and their female children, their daughters, and or even other family members, siblings, and so on. I think we have to put our heads together and figure out how could you do something that will make everybody the pride that's necessary in Simchas Torah, in a way that's consistent, as I said, with all the guidelines that we have. Now, just to give one example, I don't see, maybe not with Sifrei Torah, as the Rebbe says in his opinion, his final opinion about the matter, but maybe not with Sifrei Torah. Maybe there's other ways to celebrate. Maybe Fabrengens. It doesn't have to be seen as a second-class thing. It could be seen as because it's all about pnimius. Just to do things because everyone else is doing it, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking to have a true exuberant celebration of the neshama as it dances with Hashem's Torah. And as Chassidus says, that we become the legs of Torah. Torah celebrates with us, and we celebrate with Torah. This is something that every person, every Jewish person, man and woman, deserves. So I am sure that there can be found, and I would start with a fabrengen, a good, solid fabrengen. Remember, Hakofot of the Rebbe this past second night followed a big fabrengen for 3 hours, where the Rebbe explained Al Teresa, and frankly, that was where you really saw, at least in Aziz. Obviously, the dance is the dance, and the power of the dance I mentioned before cannot be replaced by learning. But a good fabrengen doesn't mean just a fabrengen. It means nigunim. It means all that comes with the fabrengen, the whole environment. And I don't see why that cannot become a mainstay. Just because right now the tradition is that Simchas Torah is done and mostly the men dance and the women watch, doesn't mean we can't have other ways of expressing it, as I said, consistent with the guidelines that we were taught. I know one thing, that when there's a directive from the Torah and a directive from the Rebbe, there's no way that we can't find a way to implement it. The fact that we may not have found it yet, or some people are threatened by different type of new ideas, should not stop us. Obviously, as I said, consistent again with the Rebbe's letter, it has to be studied a little more in depth to realize to understand what the Rebbe really was concerned about and make sure that those concerns are addressed. And at the same time, I don't see any reason why we can't find a tremendous amount of celebration also for the women. So that's my general take on it. More suggestions, I personally would want to hear other people's ideas. And Shua B'Rev Yates put together ideas and that to come up with several suggestions that really can make Simchas Torah special for everybody, men, women, and children, each in their own particular way. Okay, so now we continue on with a few more questions. This is really not so connected to Simchas Torah, but there's a certain transition, as you'll see in a moment. And his transition goes like this. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, first of all, I'd like to tell you that a few episodes ago you addressed my personal question, and your answer was very useful and helpful to me. I want to thank you deeply. Now my doubt is, I get very excited with Simcha times, the music, the dancing, the happiness, etc. And for some reason I feel more connected to Moshiach. If one believes the Rebbe is Moshiach, is there any problem with celebrating it? Expressing it, singing it, waving flags, etc. On one hand, it feels good. On the other, I feel we have to keep some balanced behavior. Wishing you a good and sweet year. God bless you. Okay, as always, we take all questions and we address them as directly as possible, which I will try to do. I want to just begin by saying, actually, Moshiach is connected to Simchas Torah. We say it in some of the prayers we say after by Hakofot. We say that we dance with Moshe Rabbeinu with Simchas Torah, Ben Yishai, Mashiach also. As a matter of fact, the last year, Tavshin Nun Beis, the last year, Le'es Ata, meaning up till now that the Rebbe spoke to us, the last Simchas Torah Fabringen, before Hakofot, the Rebbe spoke about the connection of Mashiach, of Simchas Torah to Mashiach very directly. It's printed in Sefer HaSichos Tavshin Nun Beis, where he talks about Altiga b'Mashiach, the children, and actually connects the children to Simchas Torah. It's a very fascinating and very interesting sikha, and interesting that the Rebbe would speak about that Tavshin Nun Beis, where he set the tone for so much. So Mashiach and Simchas Torah are actually connected. The Rebbe, we know the day of the Rebbe is Simchas Torah, because if you go by the Shpizin, Shmini Atzeres is the Friedrich Rebbe, and Yosef, Yesod, and Malchus, the last, is Simchas Torah, when you go in that order. Which you begin with the Baal Shem Tov and the Avram the first day, as we know the whole order and the two different orders that are on the Shpizin themselves. So it's not surprising for someone connected to the Rebbe and connected to the idea of Mashiach. I'm not even getting now into the identity of Mashiach. That's something, as we've talked about in the past, every person makes that decision based on Torah and Halacha, and we're not here to politicize or in any way create a battle out of this. This is a hergish that a person may have. So there's no question when you're celebrating a day of Yom Tov in general, and especially a day of Simchas Torah, that person should have, as you put it, you connected more Mashiach, you feel is there to celebrate with that, the Mashiach. Including if a person feels that's the Rebbe. However you explain that. So I don't see any issue with the person celebrating with what their intentions are when people dance and sing, as long as it's with Gedusha and based on Torah and Halacha and based on things that we know the Yesodis, the foundations of Yiddishkeit. By all means, that's the whole point of dancing and celebrating. The expression, whether it's expressed through waving flags or other things, this is completely arbitrary, because doesn't say anywhere that's how you celebrate. It's true in Simchas Torah used to give children flags of a Torah, they still do. But connection of expressing it with that, I have mixed feelings, to be honest. Most importantly, more than mixed feelings, I don't like things that are done because they become statements or some type of political statements, personally. But again, it's arbitrary, meaning that doesn't say anywhere that's a mitzvah to do that. So as long as it's not a hepech halacha and not hepech hatera, and that you have to ask a rov or your mashpia, then a person celebrates. To impose it on others, obviously that's completely not in the category, not in what we're even discussing. That's altogether not acceptable. Everybody has their way of celebrating. A person has a way of celebrating personally. Simcha, as they dance and what they think about and how they sing, is their call. And I don't see any issue with it. And to me, it's not just about balanced behavior, it's a Torah behavior. We're talking about how Torah wants us to celebrate a Simcha Shel Kedusha, a holy Simcha, and not in ways that are uncomfortable to anybody else, or ways that offend anybody, or ways that are making statements just to make a statement. That's not what Simchas Torah is about. That's not what B'chal Yiddishkeit is about. So that's my general statement. If it's a pure, unadulterated place, a person is coming and singing, and people remember the Rebbe dancing by Hakofot, and they envision that as they dance and they sing the Nigurim that were sung then, by all means. Not just as nostalgia. It's a way of evoking, a way of remembering, just like we remember the Beis HaMikdash, just like we remember other things. But I don't want anyone to interpret that this is a distant memory. For some people, it's a very real memory. For me, it's a real memory. It's a thing I live with. Simchas Torah, for me, you can't even separate from the times that we danced by Hakofos with the Rebbe. That was like, to me, the model, the symbol, the epitome of what dancing Simchas Torah is. And the details of it, again, is an individual one that everyone has to keep to their own heart. There doesn't have to be made announcements or proclamations or declarations. That's a personal thing, and everyone in their own particular way. With that, I just wanted to go over to another question which came in, just as Hakofot, that's what I mean by the transition. The transition. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I have a question that has troubled me for quite some time. While it may sound irreverent, I ask in sincerity. In Parsha Shoftim, in Parsha Shoftim, we learn about the laws and signs of a false prophecy. And that when a prophet's prophecy doesn't come to pass for good, it is a sign that it was a false prophecy, and he was a false prophet. The Rebbe said in the early 90s as a prophecy that Moshiach was coming in the 7th Chabad generation. That didn't happen. To say that we're in the 7th generation as long as we don't have a new Rebbe is to render the Rebbe's words meaningless, and to make a mockery of them. What are we to make of the Rebbe's prophecy? Was it false prophecy? Are we to follow the directives of Parsha Sheftim? Okay, irreverent does not necessarily faze me, and I hope it doesn't faze our listeners, even though we have to be respectful at all times. But I take irreverent more as being honest and open. You have a question, a candid question. So even if it's irreverent, we can ask the question if it's also presented in the right respectful way. I read the question. Some people I know may be offended by the question, but I read it anyway because there are people that ask this, more than one, you can rest assured. So I want to address it, and maybe this is a good opportunity since Simchas Torah is coming, and Moshiach. I talked about Ben Yishai, I talked about the Rebbe Sich and Tavshin Beis. Firstly, let's start from scratch. Let's start with prophecy. In Parsha Sheftim in Torah, which is actually the Parsha when the Rebbe spoke about prophecy of Geula, Sheftim Tavshin Nun Aleph, the Parsha talks about a prophet coming, or Moshe Rabbeinu, or a Shaya Novi, or any prophet that would come later that would say something that was a false prophecy, and there are very harsh laws about that. So the first thing you need to establish is, did the Rebbe speak about the Geula as a prophecy? So some will say, Sheftim Nun Aleph is a prophecy. It's a Sicha, the Rebbe spoke it as a Sicha. Is it halachic prophecy? I am not equipped or what's the word I want to use? Authorized. I don't have the authority or the knowledge to be able to establish whether this is considered official prophecy, like a prophecy from Moshe Rabbeinu and the others, in a way that you can then subject the questions you may have as you would the strict criteria as it does in Torah about what prophecy is. We know the Sikha, I happen to know it quite well, happened to be the one that was Zeicha merited to write down the Sikha after Shabbos and prepared for the Rebbe's editing, which he then edited. But nevertheless, I also know we have to have the qualifications, we have to know whether we have the credentials to be able to interpret in that fashion. That's statement number one. Number two, let us say it's a full prophecy. So who says when? The Rebbe didn't say a date. He didn't say what date. In general, yes, he spoke about the Deir HaShvi in the first Maimer Bas Legani many times, but Deir HaShvi, as you hint to, or more than hint, you actually say, can mean many things. Deir HaShvi can mean the Chassidim of the Rebbe. It could also be, as the Rebbe said very clearly, Moshiach should be here already, but we have to do one thing. So we have to be very careful to make this type of definitive prophecy in that fashion. And even if yes, there's no time involved. Now, had the Rebbe said, hypothetically, that Mashiach is going to come on this and this Sunday, this and this date, in that type of technical way, that's also a discussion what that would mean. But he didn't. So I don't know if you can apply all these questions quite in that way. What does a nevuah mean? When you say the Rebbe said a nevuah, the Frierdiker Rebbe said a nevuah, the Alter Rebbe said a nevuah. I don't know if we can apply the same power of nevuah, not to take away that they can't be neviim, and not take away that they did not say something, but you have to know whether that applies, all those halachas fit there, as I said before. And as I said, the date is not that. The truth is, I'm uncomfortable even talking about it this way. I'll tell you why. Because I look at the whole thing very differently. I don't look at it, the Rebbe said a prophecy, did it happen, did it not happen? The Rebbe is a Rebbe. The Rebbe directed and led us of what we should be doing with our lives and why we sent to this earth. If you listen to Basel Legani Tovshin Yud Aleph, you see the Rebbe says, we are the Deir HaShvi that comes, but not by our choice, not by our avodah. We come, the seventh generation from the Alter Rebbe. And our mission is to bring, like Moshe Rabbeinu, the seventh generation of Avraham Avinu, to bring the Shekhinah down below. And the whole point of the Maimer and the whole point of all the Sikhs that talk about is what we should be doing. So I never saw it as the Rebbe getting up on a mountain and making announcements about a generation. To me, it's actually quite immature and childish to think that those terms. It's not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a Rebbe who's directing us what we should be doing to bring the Geula. And there are things we know, there are things we don't know. I cannot go and say that I know exactly what it would take. The Rebbe didn't say, he said, he gave us the Aved. Then when Chavches Podim Tavshem Mem Zayin, then Chavches Nisan Tavshem Nun Aleph. And the Rebbe's words that I give it to you, I did everything I can. I've given my explanations and I believe that they are pretty accurate, if I may say so myself, consistent with the Rebbe's words. But however you interpret it, and that's fine with me, however you interpret it, it's clearly he gave us something to do. That's not a question. The question is what to do. What does it mean to open your eyes? What does it mean that the work is finished, but we have to still prepare something? However you interpret it, it's clear there's a job to do. And that's how I see it. As a mature adult, the Rebbe is giving us a work to do. And maybe we didn't do what we have to be done. Maybe the Rebbe says, when the Rebbe says the world is ready and receptive, maybe had we done Yifutzim and Nesach Chutzah the way we should be doing, that's how I'm thinking, we would have the Gula here. So it's much more, it's not just a Nevuah and that's it, and we all sit around. It's a partnership. And maybe the Rebbe bound himself to us, whether we like it or not. Did he have to? Fine, but he gave us the schus. He bound himself to us that we have in some way that Nossi goes over from Hanossi to Akel in the Rebbe's words, of Purim Mem Zayin. So when you think of it that way, this type of question, the whole thing is moot. It's not about pointing fingers or trying to figure out who's the culprit here and who's guilty, who's not guilty, God forbid. Whether it's a nevuah, not a nevuah, fulfilled, not fulfilled. It's about what are you doing? What am I doing? That's the only question I would ask. I read it because many people have this question. But my real response is, after the first things I said was, why are you looking at the Rebbe? The Rebbe did what he had to do. I'm not worried about the Rebbe. The Rebbe said he finished what he had to do. I'm worried about me and you and I. The Rebbe said, Efshel Zayin, Ein, Etzvei, Drai, come together, strategize. People cry out with an emes ad mosai. Again, how you interpret it. So put our heads together. That's the only thing that frankly matters. It's not our business what the Rebbe said, didn't say, whether it was, how it was fulfilled and which way it was fulfilled. Let me correct myself. Now it doesn't matter what the Rebbe said, didn't say. Of course it matters. But I mean to say, to put it on the Rebbe, did the Rebbe say a prophecy, was it fulfilled, and how was it fulfilled, and when, and what? Is not the issue here. The issue is only what you and I. But bring about ourselves, let's figure out what we need to do. Okay. With that, I have a few more questions that I was going to address, but as limits of time. So let me just do quickly a few. I'll do one more question and then a few short follow-ups. Okay. Marrying a non-Jew. It's completely unrelated to anything involved here, but since the question came in, I'll just do a quick response to this. We see clearly that after Matan Torah, throughout Nevi'im and Ksuvim, big tzaddikim role models like Shimshon and Shlomo HaMelech, and many more who married non-Jews. How is that okay? Even if some of them went through Gir, how could that be a good example to find a non-Jewish girl and convert her? Thank you. I watch your show and really appreciate it. So the Rambam, of course, addresses this very directly in Hilchos Yisur Bia, Perik Yud Gimmel, 1450, 4 halachas from Yud Dalet to Yud Zayin. Perik Yud Gimmel, Hilchos Yisur Bia, and he says directly, Shimshon and Shlomo HaMelech, and he says that no one should think that they married someone not Jewish, that they actually did a Gir. And he goes on to say that the Gir was a real Gir, a real conversion. However, the intention of the person who gets converted is important. And the intention there was not a pure intention. And nevertheless, they kept these wives because from their point of view, and that's why the Tanach calls them still non-Jewish, because it was their intentions weren't good. But from the point of view of Shlomo and Shimshon, they kept them because there is that element. And look at the halach, he says it speaks about it very directly and clearly, and the commentaries discuss it. Yet, it's very clear also that it's not a role model. There are things that were done that are not meant to be a role model. And they didn't necessarily behave in the right way, but God forbid to say they married non-Jews. So there's a colleague of mine pointed out, the Maral, Chidushi Agodas on Seita, Daf Tes or Yud, that Shimshon's desire to be mashpia and thereby elevate the chutz, meaning the outside, by converting someone, led him farther than he should have gone. So it is not seen necessarily as a positive. So the halacha makes it clear that they didn't do anything technically inappropriate, as the Rambam elaborates, but is it a role model? Absolutely not. And there are times it could be good intentions, and the intentions not necessarily, Adam HaRishon had good intentions, Kabbalah says. He wanted to be Mavar the Klippas, but he went too far, and it overcame him. It overwhelmed him, and instead of him being controlled, he was controlled. So you have this concept of people, Keirach, Pikachoya, the Helikazeh the Keirach, was said by the Rishner and others. So you see that there's the concept of doing something with a good intention, but sometimes you make a mistake because of the wrong generation. Keirach saw what would be when Moshiach comes. Yitzchak wanted to bless Esav, and yet the blachas belonged to Yaakov. Why? So Chassidus explains, because he saw Esav as he would be when Moshiach comes. And many, many more examples. Just examples. I'm not saying they're exactly the same. You can't compare Yitzchak necessarily to these situations, But there's this element after Matan Torah. So that is a quick answer to this question. If you have follow-up, please comment. I wanted to just cite also, I spoke last week about sleeping in the sukkah, episode 182. So I spoke about it to some extent, the Sikha of the Rebbe, but there are two excellent essays, one written by Rabbi Chaim Rappaport from England, and another by Rabbi Menachem Bramfman, I believe, from Israel. If you want to have the links, because the link is too long to read here, I'll be happy to send long, extensive discussion on the whole idea, which brings many, many different customs and really very thorough, I would say very, very thorough explanation that really can help anyone that has questions about this topic or has to answer others that have these questions. I will also do quickly another follow-up, which is, in episode 180, I told the story the name of Rabbi Shalom Ber Veshetsky about someone who was by Yechidus of the Rebbe, with the Rebbe, and was speaking somewhat in a derogatory way about Baal Teshuva, the Hadara Torah. And the Rebbe said, as I said then, who are you speaking about? A very, very powerful Yechidus. So this is written to me by a son of Rabbi Veshetsky. He writes, "Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I just want to add to the story you said in episode 180 about Baal Teshuva, which you had heard from my father, Rabbi Shalom Ber Veshetsky, Olav Shalom Zal. I also heard this story from him. I just want to add one point you missed. This is the way I heard it from him. The Rebbe said to the person who questioned the Baal Teshuva yeshiva as follows: This is the true taking out the yakar, the valuable, the precious, from the zeal, from the what I say, the zeal would be the dirt, not the dirt, the dross. That's the word I was looking for. Take the precious out from the dross. I'm just translating. This is the true taking out the precious from the dross. They are great souls, or very high souls. And that I did not mention. Another story I heard from my father regarding, so that's, thank you for that addition. Then he adds this. Another story I heard from my father regarding Baal Teshuva. At Yechidus, the Rebbe asked an individual about a certain issue which the person felt it wasn't for his stature. So he said to the Rebbe, "I'm not from the Baal Teshuva." The Rebbe responded, "Favos takenisht," and why are you takenat? I'll leave the translation for you. A good Geben Shtiyar, Shleima Veshetsky. Okay. I heard actually this second part of the story from the name of other Rebbes, but he's saying clearly he heard it from his father, and his father was a reliable source. So now we have a story. The Rebbe said, "Favos takenisht." So thank you for that. There's more to follow up. I wanted to follow up about prayer because I wanted to keep that going, but I'm going to move that to next week's episode. So I'm going to go to the Chassidus Question and then the essays. Okay, Chassidus Question is like this: why is the dancing of Simchas Torah called Hakofot? We call it Hakofot. Hakofot means circles. Why do we circle the bimah and dance in a circle? You see, everything is in circles. It's a very good question, a very powerful question, but also a very powerful answer. So Chassidus, based on Kabbalah, if you're familiar with the sugya in Kabbalah, in Eitz Chaim, when he talks about the Lifnei Tzimtzum, the divine infinite light encompassed all of existence. So there's no room for anything else. Then the Eibishter concealed, diminished the light, concealed it, leaving the Chol Lamokim Poni. But it's spoken specifically like a circle. There's no jagged edges. Obviously, all this is not anthropomorphic. We're talking here metaphorically. Think of it, a conceptual circle. Why? Because it had to be equal from all sides. And the Arizal in Eitz Chaim, but more at length in Moveh She'arim and other Sfarim of his, all written by Reb Chaim Vital, talks about befedish, not a square, and not in any way, because the square would right away mean it's not equidistant. Because the pieces that are the farther corners of the square would be distant, more distant than from the center than the edges. So it has to be a circle, which is called the Makif, called the Eagle HaGadol, the first big circle, the great circle. In that, he was Mamshech HaKav, and that's called Eagle, a Kav. A Kav is a thin ray of light, like a thread, Kav V'chut. And that Kav says, Chezur Misagel. The Kav went and made another eagle inside the big Eagle HaGadol. So in this big black hole, so to speak, in black space of a circle, empty circle, like the hole of a donut, or the hole of a bagel, just to use an irreverent analogy, the Kav, which is a thin line that has Milo Mata, higher and lower hierarchy, created an eagle, and then another eagle, another eagle. So we have what Kabbalah calls Igulim V'Yesher. That existence consists of circles and lines. Line defines structure, because a line, there's a higher point of a line, there's a lower point of a line, and a circle defines makif, which is beyond, transcends structure, because everything is equal distance when you're in a circle. In the language of Chassidus, this is called seviv kalam, mamala kalam. Seviv, surrounds. As the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya Perek Memches, doesn't mean surrounds literally. It means that it's not revealed, it's not sensed, it's beyond us, so it's equal in that sense. And there's mamala kalam, which is the energy that permeates, that divides between Daimim, Tzemeach, Chaim, Medaber, between the mineral, vegetable, animal, and human being, that divides between water and fire, between all the different structures of existence. Without Pnimi, you'd have a divine energy, but it would be an all equalizer. You wouldn't have the diversity of the multitudes of existence. You wouldn't have the Marabo Masecha. On the other hand, without the Makif, you wouldn't have the power of creation, because Mamala Kalam is commensurate and tailored to each energy. In Avedis Ha'adam, in Keiches HaNefesh, I should say, Rotzen, Keser. Rotzen is the makif, because Rotzen doesn't have a local location in the body. The will to walk, the will to think, the will to move is all one Rotzen, meaning an all-encompassing makif. And there's the Keiches Pnimim, the internal faculties, Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, or Chachma, Bina, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Yisrael, Malchus, the localized faculties. In Yiddishkeit, you'll find these two are constantly a fundamental principle, fundamental in all of Yiddishkeit. I mentioned before, the sukkah is a makif, the dal minim is more pnimi, more internal. The talis you wear surrounds us, like our sukkah is a complete surround makif. The tzitzis is pnimi. In the Beis HaMikdash, in the Mishkan, you have the kelim and you have the yerias, or you have the walls. Chassidus talks at length about the difference between Moshe Rabbeinu and Betzalel. Which should come first? First, he says, first you build the kelim, or first you build the kelim, or first you build the walls. And Moshe started with the kelim because the kavanah was pnimius. But in truth, in order, as he said, an architect, first you put a building and then you bring things into the building. So Makiv Pnimi is central everywhere you look. You look at Mitzvah's Binyan Migdash and Derech Mitzvah, you'll see how he speaks about it in the context of Seviv and Mamala. So therefore, when we talk about it in more psychological and personal Aveda terms, Makif always comes first because it's the surrounding energy. It's like you have with a teacher, he's a bit over your head, so you don't really get the idea, it hovers above you. But then when you internalize it, like he speaks in Likutei Torah V'Eschanan, you internalize it, then a new Makif emerges. The Seder Aveda throughout Tishrei is also defined by Makifim and Pnimim, and that's why throughout Sukkot, Heshainus, we surround the bimah. We circle the bimah. It's the Makif, because you're being drawing down higher energies, because a Makif is always higher than who we are. That's why it surrounds us. But then you want to internalize it. So the whole process is these Makifim. Every day you circle is a higher Makif. You internalize that through the Daled Minim, or through Simcha and through other ways that we internalize it, and then comes a higher makif. So Simchas Torah, which is the epitome of Sukkot, and coming after all the 7 days of Eshainus, and of course after Eshainus Rabbah, when we go around 7 times, what happens then is that's the ultimate makifim, as he explains in Torah Sholem, the Rebbe Rashab and the Sichos, but also in the Maimorim, the ultimate makifim that you take, and then you internalize. The goal of that is to internalize it. But Simchas Torah is mostly makif. Sefer Torah is wrapped. And that's what the significance of the circles. Now, if you think of it, every chuppah, 7 times around. They surrounded Yericha, they went around 7 times. The chuppah itself is a surrounding. The ring is a circle. And Tzaddik explains that in Kiddushin, in marriage, which is also Simchas Torah, is the celebration. Remember, the end of the Sheva Brachas from Yom Kippur's marriage. So we mentioned earlier. So what do you have? You have the makif, which is the going around circles. You have the ring. You have the chuppah, but you also, of course, have the pnimis, because husband and wife have to be connected to pnimis too, internally and intimately, and not just in a makivdik way. So this is some of the so-called mystical, if you wish, Chassidic explanation, but also the aved of it is understanding we're gathering and drawing down higher energies that are above us, and then making them internal, and only to appreciate as you climb the ladder even a higher level of the horizon. So in the beginning, the horizon is one level. When you climb higher and you internalize the higher level, only to allow the next level to emerge, and you see how there's always a deeper level. As the Baal Shem Tov says, for every question there's an answer, and for every answer there's another question. This is a way of the journey of life. Now let's do quickly the 3 essays because of time limitations. Again, the first essay is Escaping by Connecting by Manny Shollar, age 16, Yeshiva Boy School of Pittsburgh. There were quite a few submissions actually from there. Very much appreciated. Looks like that the school really used this and I encourage everyone to use it as a great tool to get students, whether boys or girls, to immerse themselves in applying Chassidus by taking a MyLife Chassidus and applying it. So Manny Shollar writes about, begins by saying 350 million people of all ages suffer from depression globally. That means that 0.0043% of the global population are currently dealing with depression on a daily basis. All of these people have the ability to turn their lives around. However, because Chassidus generally and Tanya specifically clearly outline the path to a happier and healthier mind. And he goes on to explain Tanya chapter 26. I'm very impressed, first of all, a 16-year-old to sit down and apply themselves, think about depression in that way, and take Chassidus and the Alter Rebbe's approach with the methods of being both realistic with yourself concerning weaknesses and shortcomings on your part while still being optimistic. Very impressive in that sense. And it continues to really take the Tanya and really put it into his own words, which I really encourage everyone to read, because that's really what it is. It's an adaptation of Tanya in applied terms regarding an issue that unfortunately plagues many people. And he concludes, this is how man should rid himself of his depression, improving his mental health and strengthen his relationship with God based on the principles stated in Tanya. The next essay is To Live or to Leave by Joyce A. Isaacson, age 39, Fairfax, Virginia. And this essay deals with a very painful topic, unfortunately, taking one's life. To live or to leave, she writes, has been one of the great and challenging choices that many people who are depressed struggle with, and unfortunately those who choose to leave and end their lives. In the Torah, in the book of Vayikra, God commanded us not to stand idly by our brother's blood. The case of losing quality of life among the depressed people and those who committed suicide are such a serious concern in our society, in which I choose to address the problem of depression and suicide with the hope of providing solution to this problem from God's teachings and the teachings of Rabbanim, Gedalim, and Tzaddikim. I asked the following social experts, who are also my friends working on a different field but having a common call, to help those who have struggled in a personal and social issues, namely a school psychologist, a hospital psychiatrist, a private practice psychotherapist, and a doctor of social work for the military servicemen and their families. And goes on to describe what their results and their reports. And it comes down to a list of, based on the observance of our social experts, they advise to ask frankly a troubled person the following questions. Are you depressed? 1. 2. Are you suicidal? 3. When is the last time you were thinking or planning to do it? How do you plan to do it? 4. Tell me what bothers you and let us figure out a solution together. 5. Give assurance to that person that she is not alone and not to lose hope. 6. Give a hug if you can according to the halacha within the Torah laws. The power of a hug is very life-saving. Connecting to another person brings healing to the soul and gives moral strength to the person. And 7, keep the social connection to assist the depressed person to find and build strength to choose and live a meaningful life. And then goes on using Tanya to apply this. Now, I'm speaking very candidly and openly about something that many people don't like to speak about, but because this is unfortunately a real issue, I wanted to point this out. I think this is the first essay I've read that really addresses this in a direct way. Obviously, I want to qualify this by no means an exhaustive or clinical or type of reliable and authoritative statement about it. I should say, obviously, it has value, but a meaningful life, a MyLife essay is not necessarily the place but it has a lot of tremendous points that can be used in addressing this important issue based on Chassidus. And then goes on with suggestions, prayer, gratitude, learning positive attitude, positive perspective in life, based on the Tanya and other places of Chassidus that talk about this. I should add others. 5, volunteering, giving yourself to others also nurtures you back. Build family ties, build friends, engaging in positive, healthy, and lively activities. Collect kosher jokes and make others laugh. Laughter is contagious. So this is, again, a good essay. definitely should be part of the whole discussion, and with all the qualifications that I mentioned. I didn't mean in any way, in any, God forbid, negative way about the author. I just meant to qualify for obvious reasons. Topics like this should be addressed case by case, in person, not just based on an essay, and as well as it's written, because there's so many different variables and nuances involved. Finally, the third essay, To Manifest Redemption in the Face of Despair, by Linda Miriam Aziz-Zadeh, Honey Colony Managing Editor, Jerusalem, Israel. Most of us, she writes, are perpetually in need of redemption from personal hardship, be it difficulty finding a soulmate, infertility, financial problems, illness, or some other difficulty. Popular culture buzzes with New Age principles on positive thinking and the law of attraction as a means to manifest one's desires. Likewise, many Chassidic sources teach that we can bring about both personal and global redemption through complete bitachon, trust in God's power, and chesed, loving kindness. This essay will explore a way to transcend this despair by applying a series of Chassidic teachings to a well-known medrash. We will discover a new perspective wherein despair and frustration fuel the ultimate goal to manifest redemption. And goes on to discuss the power of bitachon and positive thinking. Obviously, the concept of think good will be good. The Rebbe's Sikha, the famous Sikha in Chelik Lamed Vav 36, about bitachon and that expression. Goes on with the medrash about Adam HaRishon, how he gave his years to David HaMelech, and explains that in an applied way. A very solid essay, well worth reading. And this and all the other essays I mentioned and all new essays are posted at meaningfullife.com/MyLife. And if you subscribe to our weekly newsletter, we send you all the new postings. Okay, so it's a good essay, and all the essays, thank you again for all your contributions and your questions. And I want to conclude, everyone should have a continuing Freilich Sukkos, but a Freilich Sukkos that will spill over and transform the entire year and the entire world into a Simchadic experience. Open Simchas with Simchas Elam Al-Reish, the Simcha of the Gula Amitis Vashlema. Dance well, celebrate well, each and everyone's unique way, and celebrate the life you were given, the mission we have, and the final ultimate mission, as we've discussed, to that tipping point, to make that, to contribute something that will cause the tipping point of having the Gula Amitis Vashlema. Everyone have a good Yontif, a Freilich Yontif. We will be here, Isruchag, the day is next Sunday, which is the day after Shabbos Bereshis, transformed by Sukkot, Shani Rabbah, Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, Shabbos Bereshis, next Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. This has been My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 183. A guten Freilichen Yontif and a Freilichen Tamid.